2018 and the balanced budget agreement for fiscal years 2018 and 2019 sets the necessary conditions to start the long process of repairing the damage resulting from years of combat operations compounded with deferred modernization. We all acknowledge this damage did not occur in a single year, and it will take consistent levels of long-term increased investment to rebuild. The Army's modernization budget request for this year represents a 22% increase over last year's modernization budget request. I'm pleased to see the Army is requesting enough funding to modernize 1.5 armored brigade combat teams, as opposed to last year's plan that modernized only half of the requirements for one complete ABCT. The Marine Corps procurement request for ground equipment this year is $2.9 billion, which, if enacted, would be 80% increase over last year's budget request of $1.6 billion. So it does appear that the Army and Marine Corps are taking the necessary steps to accelerate modernization and mitigate existing capacity shortfalls and capability gaps. For example, the Army has identified 6 modernization priorities that include long-range precision fighters, next-generation combat vehicles, future vertical lift, Army network, air and missile defense, and soldier lethality. To help streamline procurement of these capabilities, I understand the Army has also established 8 cross-functional team pilot programs to expedite the requirements process and accelerate these priorities. The subcommittee expects to hear how the fiscal year 2019 request is addressing these modernization priorities and better understand program schedules and fielding timelines that will enable acceleration of these capabilities to the soldier. As a follow-up to the subcommittee's hearing from last September on Army tactical network modernization, we expect our witnesses to provide additional details and justifications underpinning this new strategy and how the fiscal year 2019 request enables it. The National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2018 also directed the Army to develop a long-term modernization strategy. Today is a good opportunity for the witnesses to provide us with an update on where the Army is with developing this strategy. From Marine Corps perspective, this year and next will represent critical milestones for the Amphibious Combat Vehicle Program, the CH-53K Heavy Lift Helicopter Program, and as well as accelerated ground-based air defense initiatives. We expect to receive updates on all of these issues today. In summary, we cannot dig ourselves out of this readiness and modernization hole in just a couple of years or in the AA cycles. I want to again place emphasis on what I said last week's subcommittee hearing. We are experiencing a crisis in military readiness. Over the last 3.5 weeks, we have witnessed a series of aviation accidents where 16 service members have tragically lost their lives. Many of these tragic events are a result of lack of training hours due to constrained resources and or the current state of aging equipment, all of which resulted from years of underfunding our military and clearly shows the magnitude of the problem we are all dealing with. This increase in modernization funding is absolutely required to maintain our competitive advantage against strategic competitors and improve overall readiness. However, with the increased funding comes additional responsibility. If we are to sustain higher top-line defense budgets, we need to be assured that the military services and the industrial base can execute the funds that Congress has authorized and appropriates. The bottom line is we have to get this right, and we have to do it now. Before I begin, I would like to recognize my colleague and good friend from Massachusetts, Ms. Nikki Songas, for any comments she would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today to discuss Army and Marine Corps modernization budgets for fiscal year 2019. Good to have you with us. Based on an initial review of the budget request, both the Army and Marine Corps appear to have received significant funding increases in most areas. This has enabled, in several cases, both services to accelerate procurement of needed items, hopefully providing stability while also leading to lower costs through buying in bulk. For example, the Army has increased its procurements of armored combat vehicles of several types to approximately 1.5 brigades per year, a dramatic increase from the half a brigade per year or less of recent budgets. The Marine Corps has been able to simultaneously buy more joint-like tactical vehicles while also pursuing healthy production rates of other vehicle upgrade programs. As our witnesses will recall, this subcommittee had a hearing last year focused on the Army's new plans in the area of communications networks and associated programs. At the time, I was very concerned that the Army might be making hasty decisions regarding eliminating current programs in favor of chasing new and potentially unproven technology. Now, after reviewing the Army's updated budget request in detail, I'm cautiously optimistic that the Army is pursuing a more conservative plan that realigns some funding for current efforts, but maintains or even expands funding for the majority of programs. The Army also plans to do a significant amount of experiments and prototype efforts to explore new technologies. These efforts are intended to inform a new tactical network for the future. Furthermore, the Army intends to maintain competition in most of its radio programs, which is good to see. Finally, there is one major question mark, and that regards the path forward for providing better on-the-move communications capability to Armored Brigade combat teams. These units were going to receive WIN-T Increment 2 for this purpose, but that aspect of the WIN-T program has been terminated. It remains to be seen what the Army's plans are for providing this capability. I hope to hear more today about the way forward. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Thank you. I understand General Murray will provide opening remarks for the Army, followed by General Walsh, who will provide opening remarks for the Marine Corps. Without objections, the witnesses' prepared statements will be included in the record. General Murray, please begin.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Turner, which is a nice short title, sir. Ranking Member Zongas, distinguished members of this subcommittee, on behalf of our Army Secretary, the Honorable Mark Esper, and our Chief of Staff, General Mark Milley, General Ostrowski and I look forward to discussing Army modernization with you. Last year, I told you that we were approaching an inflection point. This year, I would tell you that based upon everything you just talked about, we are at an inflection point. We can no longer afford to choose between near-term readiness and modernization, and specific to modernization, we can no longer afford to choose between improving existing systems and developing new ones. We must be able to do both, and I think you'll see some of that in the 19 budget, and then specifically when we bring the 20 budget across in about a year, you will see that. The Army's focus on the demands of ongoing campaigns combined with constrained resources and industrial-age organizational model have slowed, deferred, and in some cases, halted the development of new capabilities. Meanwhile, our adversaries have or are quickly attaining a competitive advantage. Building on the fiscal year 2018 President's budget, we believe the FY19 budget request aligns with the National Defense Strategy, continues to reverse the downward trend that has stifled Army modernization, and serves as an important step toward expanding and maintaining overmatch. However, we must stress that a major increase in modernization this year will not, in itself, reverse the trend. We must have sustained, predictable, and adequate funding over the long term to allow us to develop an effective plan to reduce future risk while making the most effective use of the valuable resources we are entrusted with. In fiscal year 2019, we plan to selectively upgrade the equipment that is critical to near-term readiness and focus our science and technology and our research, development, test, and evaluation funding on the 6 Army modernization priorities. Those areas crucial to combat, which have eroded in the restricted budget environment. These include, as you mentioned, Chairman, long-range precision fires, next-generation combat vehicle, future vertical lift, the network, air and missile defense, and soldier lethality. The American people expect their Army to win, and meeting this expectation requires the Army to maintain overmatch against the near-peer threat. We urge Congress to provide fiscal stability so we can maintain our current warfighting readiness while simultaneously building a more modern, more capable, and more lethal force for the future. I'd like to thank you and the entire committee for your unwavering support of the men and women of the United States Army, our Army civilians, and our Army families. Thank you, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Walsh.
Thank you, Chairman Turner, Ranking Member Zongas, distinguished members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify before you today with my teammates, General Murray, General Ostrowski, and also my partner, General Shrader. The Marine Corps' ability to serve as our nation's crisis response force is due largely in part to the subcommittee's continuing strong support, and we appreciate that on behalf of all the Marines. Additionally, the Bipartisan Budget Act is going to go a long way to give us the stability we really need to be able to continue to develop the capabilities we have. Across the Marine Corps Combat Development Command, we've got over 18,000 men and women, sailors, Marines, civilians that are operating as the capability developers for the Marine Corps and integrating this across the Marine force. Over the past year, the Marine Corps has been focused on deterring conflict by providing combined arms teams to theaters either already in crisis or at the risk of crisis to meet the Congress's mandate to be ready to suppress or contain international disturbances short of large-scale war. We operate, you talked about the National Defense Strategy, within 3 of the 4 areas described in the National Defense Strategy of the contact, blunt, and surge forces. Our forward deployed Marines and sailors operate daily as part of that contact layer. Today, they are vulnerable to attacks in ways we haven't seen in decades. To operate within the contact and blunt layers, Marines need to foster the lethal combat forces that to be a critical deterrence force. During the last several budget cycles, we've been focused heavily on improving our readiness to improve the force and increase our ability. But with the stability that you've given the budget, with a 7% increase in the total obligating authority within the Marine Corps, we've been able to push money into our modernization counts at a rate of 32%. This increase in modernization spending is a signal and a sense of urgency that we'll be prepared to address the threats in the National Defense Strategy. Like the Army and the Marine Corps 2019 budget, we aligned ourselves with 5 priorities: information warfare, long-range precision fires, air defense, command and control in the degraded environment, and protected mobility and enhanced maneuver, along with the Secretary of Defense direction to increase lethality, resilience, agility, and build a flexible and dynamic force. Additionally, I'd like to emphasize this subcommittee our close coordination and, in many cases, full alignment with the United States Army and their programs. Our work with the Army provides more efficient use of taxpayer dollars and ensures the end product provides the best capability to our Marines, soldiers, and the operating forces. Thank you for allowing General Shrader and I to testify before you today.
Thank you, gentlemen. A couple questions before I pass on to my ranking member. General Murray, thank you for accompanying me when we visited the Holston Army Ammunition Plant. That was very illuminating to get a firsthand view of both the state of the facilities, the demand issues, and production. Holston and Radford are both government-owned, contractor-operated facilities, and both are in the process of expanding their production capability of critical materials needed for ramping up production of high-demand munitions. I'd like for you to update us on the facilities, where they are at expanding production, any additional information you'd like to give us. You gave us an effective understanding of the issues when we were there together at Holston. And in your opinion, are there ways to accelerate these projects? I'd like to also know what near-term actions are being considered. Are there things that we need to be considering as we put the NDAA together? And are you considering stockpiling TNT?
Yes, sir, Chairman. Thank you for that question. And as you know, at Holston in 18, and it's really a multi-year effort, so it really goes even before fiscal year 18. But in 18, we put $105 million and then another $100 million in 19 to expand the capacity. That's about a 6 million pound increase in RDX and about a 2 million pound increase in IMX. And that work continues. It is probably not any different than the schedule we showed you when we were down there. We have looked for opportunities to accelerate and taken those opportunities where we could. But as you know, it is until it becomes an insensitive munition, it is in fact a sensitive munition. So the chances for acceleration are probably not great, but we remain on track. And we have looked at the issue of storing TNT, and we continue to explore that option. The demand for the insensitive munitions in theater right now is dropping slightly, so we'll be able to catch up on some of the backlog, but we will continue to look for opportunities to expand the use of TNT, and then also at additional investments in those 2 critical facilities.
General Walsh, we're aware that the Marine ground units are almost wholly without an effective organic air defense system. We're also aware on the subcommittee that the Marine Corps has plans to develop a family of systems that can defend against airborne threats. Could you please update on the Marine Corps' plans, and how do these coordinate with other service branches?
Thank you, Chairman. We've got really what I would say is a 2-phased approach to this. In near term, we had been looking at counter-UAS capabilities, but now with the National Defense Strategy to increase that, we've kind of looked at longer-range capabilities. So within the near term, what we've been developing on is a light capability on our M-Razors, which are our ATV capability, and also on the MATV that we have. And on that capability, we've got integrating Stinger missiles for rotary wing and fixed wing, a counter-UAS Coyote capability, an EW capability we call MODI, and also integrating a laser capability that we're working very closely with the Army on with a counter-laser weapon system, along with the sensors that go with that. That's the near-term capability, and it's kind of a spiral ability that we're going to integrate that into the JLTV that goes as it goes forward. And as that goes forward, we're working very closely with the Army on a longer range capability. In the interim, we also have a $4.5 million that we've got in 18 that we're working to develop and integrate a COT system that we could demonstrate near term as we develop more money into the future that we've got for R&D with the Army to integrate in with their IFBIC Block 2. And I asked General Shrader if he'd like to add anything from the acquisition side.
Sir, I would just echo really the work that we've done on the lightweight system that General Walsh talked about. We call it the lightweight marine air defense system that we've put on the Razor. We have to date fielded 14 of those within a 12-month period from identifying the requirement to fielding. So we're happy with that. We want to continue on that effort. And on that vehicle, it's two vehicles where you have a command and control vehicle, and then you have another vehicle that has the radar and the capability to compute the firing data and then engage with, we'll just say, EW MODI system. And we've done that in a 14-month period. And we use that as the base and then spiral, what General Walsh said, spiral more capability into that, not only that system, but also into the MATV and the JLTV as that comes on board, and also working with the laser, the 2-kilowatt laser. That's all I would add, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Songas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since the start of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, DoD developed various systems for quickly addressing urgent needs for equipment. These efforts understandably started as urgent needs directly tied to ongoing combat operations. Recently, however, the use of the term urgent has migrated to other, more routine requirements, often tied to need statements from Army or Marine Corps units that in many cases are not deploying into a combat zone in the near future. Of course, the entire Army and Marine Corps exist to be prepared for possible combat in the future. So expansion of the label of urgent need to include anything plausibly related to a future combat operation could obviously include almost anything. While I support, as many on this, we all on this committee do, support filling such urgent needs for units in combat or about to deploy to combat, I'd like to explore what looks like an expanding definition of urgent need. So with that, General Murray and General Walsh, can you talk about and explain how the Army and Marine Corps currently categorize urgent needs? And can you also explain in detail where such urgent need statements come from and how are they reviewed? So we'll start with you, General Murray.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So it's hard to know when you're going to deploy into combat. So we've had predictability over the last 16 years. I understand that with patch charts and BCTs can prepare, year out. But it's hard to predict the world situation. So most of the urgent requirements that we're seeing are coming from division commanders. They are funneled up through corps commanders, prioritized and racked and stacked, if you will. They go to the forces commander if they're within FORSCOM. If they're within the Pacific, they go through the 4-star in the Pacific. If they're in Europe, they go through the 3-star Army commander in Europe. And then they come back to the building. The G3 racks and stacks them from an Army-wide priority look. We have the lawyers look at them to make sure that there is a compelling reason why it is an urgent requirement, and normally either the vice or the chief are briefed on them that this is an emerging requirement, this is the way we like to do.
And what would the standard be for that the lawyer is employing to decide
It's
that?
there's probably no piece of law I can point to and say, now there are Army regulations and there are DOD instructions that talk about urgent and compelling, but they don't point to a specific, it has to be A, B, C, D, and E to be qualified as urgent. So it's really based upon the world situation. I mean, what's going on in Korea at this particular point in time has led to most of the DR's directed requirements here recently. And then it's always for a limited quantity, and it's not an acquisition strategy. It's just naming the requirements for the piece of equipment that we're after if it doesn't currently already exist in our inventory.
Is there any process in place to make sure that these decisions aren't inappropriately influenced by non-government actors such as industry representatives?
From my perspective, yes, because the directed requirements that I have seen and I have personally signed do not, it's a requirements document. This is the requirements for a capability that we would like the acquisition community to either find and buy or produce. And that's about the limit. Now, I do put in some of those, the time frames we're talking about, because urgent implies fairly rapidly. But I've never seen or signed a directed requirement that specifies an acquisition strategy. And from my personal experience, from my perspective, there has been no contractor influence on the solution.
General Walsh.
Congressman Tsongas, I think our process is parallel very much to what General Murray said. What I'll say is our urgent requests come in from our operating forces the same way. They come into our Capability Development Directorate down there at Quantico. We assess them pretty much the same way. We also have deliberate operational needs that come in from the operating force commanders. So the ones that are urgent are coming in generally from the operating forces that are in combat areas that have urgent needs, maybe loss of life or capability in that sense. They come in, we rack and stack them, and then we send them up to our Marine Requirements Oversight Council. That's up with all the deputy commandants and the assistant commandant of Marine Corps, and eventually up to the commandant. So that's the process we go through. We've been doing this a lot, as you well know, throughout Iraq and Afghanistan, so we've gotten fairly good at this. I think where the questions start to lie, I think, with Congress is the desire to go fast is starting to maybe sometimes look like it's getting outside the operational needs process. And for example, where we've developed our Rapid Capabilities Office that we've developed, and all the services have developed those. And so now we're spinning technology out fairly quickly at the lower end, not major acquisition development programs, but smaller. And I think the key part with that is trying to work with Congress, and I think in this last year we've been very successful working with Congress to show the areas that we've been working in, that we'd be wanting to demonstrate capabilities and experiment with that. And then continue to come back and engage with Congress on what actual programs that we're using experiment with to be able to try to rapidly prototype those capabilities. So I think some of it looks like this rapid capability development is merging into the urgent operational needs process, but we keep these completely separate from a process standpoint.
And are you comfortable that these decisions aren't being inappropriately influenced by, as I said, non-government actors such as industry representatives, and what do you have in place to be assured of that?
Yes, Congresswoman, I think, to be honest with you, I don't see us getting involved with the industry at that point when those capabilities come in. They come in, we look at what the best capability would be out there. We do some demonstration capabilities where we try to bring in vendors to kind of see what opportunities are out there, but we kind of look at it from more of a capability standpoint than looking at a specific a vendor's capability. And let me ask if General Shrader wants to, because he works very closely with me on this process.
Ma'am, I would say that there is on the acquisition side, the material development side, there is a process that we have in place where a vendor can introduce something, and it's a unsolicited proposal type process that we have, but as far as industry partners trying to come in and influence, try to generate a urgent need, no, ma'am, I'm not aware of anything like that going on. No, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our guests for being here today, and I'm going to start with the Army, and I want to talk about the Strykers. And I'm a big fan of the Strykers. I noticed, I guess the request is, for 3 Stryker upgrades? Is that correct right now?
As it stands right now, yes, sir.
And we're pretty well straightened out on the V hull, even though it's heavy and everything else. The folks on the Strykers over in Europe, they seem to really like that a lot. At least that's what it came back to me. Any problems with that other than the weight?
No, sir. So the Europe unit, the 2nd Stryker Cavalry Regiment, is in fact flat-bottom Stryker.
Yep.
What I think you're referring to is a 30-millimeter cannon.
No, I'm talking about the hull.
Yes, sir. Those are all.
No, the 30 millimeter I'm happy with, no problem at all. But so I'm more worried about mines and things of that nature. The other thing when I was over there and when we were at Grafenfehr and what was it, Hohen, that place where, you know where I'm talking about. And we were talking, they had 4 or 5 different variants. We had a Codell there, and they had the different systems. And I guess I didn't realize that, are they going to change that with the mortar or some of the variants that in the future, or have they pretty well standardized what is going to be available to that? And I don't have it all in front of me, but I was pretty impressed with the versatility of that weapon system.
Yes, sir. I think the actual number is 9 different variants, and I may be wrong, but it's more than 5. But in terms of the numbers of variants on the Stryker chassis, I think we stabilize it, and as a matter of fact, we're adding to it. So that will be the platform for our mobile SHORAD solution.
And we are going forward with the reactive armor, the variations of the trophy systems. I think it's my understanding both services are committed to that. We're okay on that, because I'm a big supporter of that, by the way.
So trophy, yes. Between 18 and 19, it's about 4 brigades worth that will go on the Abrams tank. We've finished the characterization of Iron Curtain, which we were trying on the Stryker. There's a decision to come on that this summer. And then we're in the process of characterizing Iron Fist on the Bradley right now down at Redstone Arsenal.
Yeah. Did you happen to look at the system that the Dutch are using for their armored personnel carriers? The big thing about it is very lightweight, supposedly. I haven't seen it. I did want to try and get over there and see what it looked like, but read a little bit on it, but not much.
I'm not familiar with the Dutch are using it. We have looked at the German system. I believe it's called ADS. We've had some folks in Germany to look at it. It's a very similar concept, different design, but a very similar concept to an intercept very close to the vehicle is the Artist system called Iron Curtain.
Okay, I'm going to get off script a little bit. I want to ask you about line charges. In fact, the last time I saw a line charge was about a year ago out at Fort Irwin. And I got to tell you, it's remarkably similar to the same line charge in terms of 51 years ago in 1967 in Vietnam, where it shoots out again. When we did it, it was from an Amtrak, and everybody holds their breath, and of course it didn't work. And it just, I have always been sketchy about that. I think everybody's sketchy about it because of the dangers involved with it, particularly to the ground troops, it rocks your system. Is there anything to improve that? Because this is the enemy that we're probably going to encounter with minefields or mines or something like that. And to be able to do something expeditiously to blow up that whatever it is, it just seemed almost archaic. And that was, I don't know, maybe anybody can answer that.
Yes, sir. And it probably is the same. There's only so many ways you can pack C4 into a tube. But what I can tell you is I know of no requirements being worked in the Army system to replace the MICLIC.
Yeah,
I didn't. Charge.
I asked that question. They said no, and I was sarcastic. I said, we're going to use the same one that I used 51 years ago. And they said, yeah, pretty much so. Anyway, I yield back.
Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for your testimony today. Most especially, thank you for your service to the country. So I understand, and we've touched on this with the chairman's question, but I understand that one of the Army's ongoing priorities is to develop systems in order to counter short-range air defense threats such as drones, and in so doing has been experimenting with high-energy lasers. As a proponent of directed energy technologies, I'm encouraged to hear that the Army is pursuing these advanced technology solutions such as the Mobile Experimental high-energy laser, or MIHEL, to supplement its current ground force capabilities. So can you discuss your progress on these efforts so far, as well as how you are training soldiers to actually operate the systems?
So I would just tell you that in addition to the one that you mentioned, we're also very much engaged in 18 with respect to a technology maturity initiative. This is taking a Stryker vehicle and putting a 50 kilowatt laser on that platform in order to get to a TRO level 7 by the first quarter of 21. So it will be integral in both the IFPC program in terms of a Block 2 IFPC, as well as mobile shore ab. So the intent is to bring that on as fast as we possibly can, because you know it's cheaper per round in terms of a shot, in order to use that particular laser technology against both RAM as well as UAS threats.
And progress on the one I mentioned, the MIHEL laser, that's different than the one that's on the Stryker, right?
Could you repeat the question, sir?
Yeah, I just want to know the mobile experimental high energy laser, or the MIHEL. Is that's not the same one that you're putting on the Stryker, is it?
So I believe you're talking about the 100 kW one, as opposed to the one that we're putting on the Stryker, which is a 50 kilowatt. Again, we've moved from 2 kilowatts to 5 kilowatts as we continue to improve the maturity of the technology. And so the next one for us right now, in terms of the Stryker-based, is the 50 kilowatt laser.
Okay. Thank you, General. With further developments in artificial intelligence, would you agree that using AI to help control swarms of drones during offensive operations, or to provide logistics to forward units, much like commercial companies are experimenting within the United States, has the potential to be game-changing? And how are you incorporating these ideas into your modernization strategy?
I would say yes to all, sir, and I would say that it is probably fundamentally the technology that has the chance of being most to changing the character of war as we move forward. And so, yes, we're very interested in artificial intelligence incorporation into weapon systems. Of course, there's policy issues that go along with that we'll have to deal with as that technology develops. We're very closely watching what is going on in industry and the other services. We're trying to capitalize off investments that OSD is making and the other services are making. We see this not necessarily as the right place to invest a tremendous amount of money right now. We think this is a technology that industry will develop much faster than we will, and the opportunity to sprint will come, and we just need to be in a position to sprint to catch up with industry when it's mature.
Thank you. And how are both your services building cyber and electronic warfare resiliency into your modernization efforts to ensure our new platforms and systems will continue to function in a contested environment?
Sir, I would just tell you that for every one of our programs during our testing, we go up against cyber threats as well as EW, and that is across the board. Not only the systems that we are currently in the process of developing, but also systems that we already have in the field, such as the Abrams tank, for instance, our Apache helicopters, not only from an outsider threat, but also from an insider threat. So we spend a lot of money and a lot of initiatives. We have red teams that go at these particular systems, whether they're out at NTC or other places, in order to ensure that whatever we are doing across the board, we're consistent with the EW threat and the cyber threat on both our ground as well as our air platforms, as well as our IT efforts.
Thank you. General Walsh?
If I could, Congressman, when we wrote our Marine Corps operating concept, one of the priorities we saw was being able to operate in the information warfare area. And from that, we did our Marine Corps Force 2025. It was about a 1.5 year long force structure review. And what came out of that was developing our MEF information groups. Within those information groups, they're focused on cyber, EW, signals intelligence, information operations. Just now this summer, we're standing up their defensive counter operations, cyber companies that are down inside the MiG. So we're now pushing that capability all the way down in small detachments, all the way down to the company level. So we're pushing the capability down in structure first, with the capabilities and material solutions, some of which we have. In a lot of ways in the electronic warfare, we've had that in our radio battalions and also in our electronic warfare prowler squadrons, our EA-6Bs, but pushing that capability down to the lowest level. The first thing was get the structure in place, and then the material solutions will follow.
Thank you all. Obviously, this is important because as much as we're making progress on these technologies, our enemies and adversaries have invested heavily in being able to disrupt our activities in a contested environment, and the more we can do to build resiliency, and the better off we are. So thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. Again, thank you for your service, and I yield back.
Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks again for your service. General Ostrowski, I wanted to touch base on where the modern operational systems for the soldier are going. We know that a soldier can carry about a third of their body weight, and as it gets higher, it affects their mobility. We know sometimes they can carry as much as 100 pounds of gear, which does impact their ability to carry out the mission. I do understand, though, that there's some new technology out there, the Squad Multipurpose Equipment Transport, better known as SMET, that's able to carry equipment, munitions, help in that, even carry a wounded soldier. So in addition to that element at the squad level for tactical flexibility and additional capacity. We all know the benefits of that, to me, are pretty clear. The Chief of Staff of the Army placed some emphasis and said, listen, we're going to use more of these ground unmanned robotic systems to achieve mission. Give me a perspective. Are there any plans in place to expedite the acquisition of a system like the SMET? Are there things that maybe you could do in the technology demonstration timelines to compress those to get more quickly to acquisition? Give us your perspective on how that's coming together.
Yes, sir. I would tell you that this is basically a modern acquisition success story in terms of the way we're doing business today. Number one, the ability to go out with a other transactional authority announcement to industry that normally would never participate in Department of Defense type initiatives. So going out to industry that typically has not had any kind of contact with us and saying, we need your help. The OTAs allow us to do that. So that's what we did in July of last year. And we had numerous candidates bring in systems as well as proposals. We down selected to 4 of those systems. We are currently at that point right now. We're waiting on the money to come in from the 18 budget. So thank you very much for getting that through. And so now as a new start, we can begin that work. So the bottom line is going forward, we will have the intent is to buy 20 systems per vendor of the 4 vendors that we down selected to. We will then put those in the field with soldiers to gain soldier feedback. And by first quarter 19, so at the end of this calendar year, the intent is to down select to 1.
Oh, good.
From there, we're going to buy approximately 60 systems, and we're going to put those out either at Fort, I would say, hang on just to have a second. Yeah, bottom line is we're going to put that at Fort Drum or Fort Campbell.
Yeah.
And the intent there is to have those in the field for approximately 1 year, during which time soldiers will be able to get the feedback on them, we'll get feedback on them, and have the opportunity to then make a down select decision to whether or not it's good enough as it is, or whether we want to improve it, with the intent to award right after that. So again, the opportunity to go faster and get capability that we know soldiers will want at the end of the day. And that's just the ground side. You know, there's other opportunities as well through aerial vehicles and the rest that we're looking into, because it's all about reducing soldier load.
Very
Sir,
good.
if I could add just really, I'm
Sure.
sorry, just
Yep.
really quickly, and I think the time, I agree with them. I think the timing is really part of the good news story. So, and this was in a case of for developmental activity, this was a directed requirement because we knew what we wanted. We knew what was available industry-wise from technology standpoint. So instead of going through a 5-year requirements process, we just wrote the requirement, got it out to industry, and 16 months later, 6 months of that being the CR, that we couldn't get started. I mean, we're ready to field capability to our soldiers right now.
That's great. That's great. Lieutenant General Walsh, I wanted to talk a little bit about the modernization efforts in the Marine Corps. About 29% of the resources for modernization are being utilized by the ground combat and tactical vehicle strategy, and the investment priority there is with the ACV. And we know that you're at Milestone C now looking for a down select to be able to get that vehicle operationalized. So it looks like ACV's on the near horizon. As you know, in the whole tactical back and forth about forcible entry, speed and surprise are important elements of that as you all are looking at that. And we know that there's some technologies out there that allow for greater resolution in early detection of things that may be coming to shore. We know even groups, even non-state actors like Hezbollah now have pretty sophisticated radar-guided missiles out there. So that all creates a little more of a challenge in the contested environment there. There's always trade-offs, as the Marine Corps has been through, in looking at speed and capability with those vehicles, and mobility, obviously, on land. So how do you have the right combination of both? Are you concerned, as you look at this right mixture of ACV range and speed within that highly contested environment? Do you think you have the mix right? And how have the ACV prototypes performed so far in this particular environment? And are you satisfied with where things are when you get to the down select?
Thank you, Congressman. I'll start with the last part of it. Is so far we've been very pleased with the two vendors and what we're getting out of those capabilities. The ACV 1.1 capability was supposed to be just a ship-to-shore capability from a threshold requirement, and we see both vendors meeting the objective capabilities. So in many ways, they're exceeding what we already have in our AAV capabilities. Now, with the trade-offs of the capabilities you talked about, as you're well familiar with, is trying to go fast. We weren't willing to trade off a lot of those capabilities to be able to be protected, maneuver, and have lethal firepower when we get ashore. So we've developed through a non-developmental program with the two vendors. We're looking forward to the Milestone C decision in June. But the larger part of your earlier question is what we've really been working on in this contested environment is we're going to have to operate differently. It's not all about Amtrak's online coming ashore. It's much more into what you were just talking about, sensing the battle space, deception, jammers in that area, and we've been doing a lot of work in that area. Last year we had our Advanced Naval Technology experiment that was focused completely on ship-to-shore maneuver. And in that ship-to-shore maneuver, the majority of the first parts of the landing operations were all unmanned systems, whether they were in the air, on the surface, and under the surface. Many of the capabilities that we saw, we learned from, as you're very familiar with, the Naval Undersea Warfare Center up in Rhode Island. We got capabilities from them that now a lot of our reconnaissance forces that we've rapidly prototyped that we're now using for swarming hydrographic capabilities to be able to sense as we come ashore. So I think this unmanned area is going to take us into many different areas to be able to do deception, but the key part is not conducting operations the way we have in the past.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Gallego.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Chair. The budget requests a significant increase of over 82% for long-range precision fires capable of up to 400-kilometer shots. The development of such technology is critical as we build the next-generation conventional deterrence, especially when looking at Korea and Europe. What is the expected timeline for R&D and fielding of this technology, to your best of your ability, obviously?
Yes, sir. The bottom line is the precision strike missile, which is now being called as opposed to long-range precision fires, is in OTA as well. So we have two competitors, both Lockheed Martin as well as Raytheon, that are competing for this. The first time that we'll have an opportunity to see where we're at is the fourth quarter of 19, when each of the vendors will provide 4 missiles to us, of which we'll fire 3. Depending on the results of that, again, the intent is to fire those at max range, so the 499. Depending on the results of that, we intend to expedite the delivery of the system much faster. Originally, it's 2025. We're thinking more like 2022. But it'll all depend on fourth quarter 19 when we get the results of the test.
Excellent. Anything to add, gentlemen?
The only thing I would add on that, working very closely with the Army on how to increase longer range capabilities coming out of our HIMARS capability. But the other piece, too, is we've got about $20 million of RDT&E in 19 to be able to look at how we can integrate a much quicker capability, commercial off-the-shelf capability for an anti-ship missile capability that in the long term, working very closely with the Army in 20 and beyond in the long-range fires capability for an anti-ship that's also capable of on-land capabilities.
Excellent. Just to kind of latch on to that theme, I understand some of the testing for these systems will go on in Arizona, good choice, at the Yuma Proving Grounds. Is there adequate space to test the long-range shots, both at Yuma and at White Sands Missile? Consider we're dealing with some rather long distances.
Yes, sir. There is more than sufficient range at both those locations to test this.
Okay. Let me move on into the tactical network modernization. The Army has requested nearly $500 million in a new, again, tactical network technology modification line. What is the intent of this line? And in other words, what does it buy? What is it bringing us?
So I think, sir, you were brief last fall on the network modernization, and you were very familiar with the HALT, the fix, and the pivot. So the network modernization modification line really does two things for us. Number one is it's primarily focused on fix. So we have halted 3 specific programs, which you're very aware of, and then the fix piece is to fix the current baseline. And our current baseline is WinT Inc. 1B, and some of the force fielded with WinT Inc. 2 on the move capability. So it's to finish the fielding of the Inc. 2 stuff that we have already purchased that will go on through 18. So it's fielding the light gear to the light infantry units primarily. Cascade of heavier equipment to some Strykers, not all of them, and to the ABCTs is to accelerate the common platform that we're going to use across all formations to include the ABCTs, the Joint Battle Command P, the JBCP, and then it's also to do some experimentation with the CFT, looking at what we're calling the integrated tactical network. And I think the thing that's exciting about this is when we developed networks in the past, we start at the top and make it fit small units, companies, platoons, battalions, and we're starting at the bottom and scaling up in this case. We're making sure it works at the platoon, company, battalion level. And right now, in 18, if the money is made available, we intend to look at an IBCT, an ABCT, and an SBCT and do the scalability up. And this is mostly, it's almost solely modified commercial off-the-shelf gear or SOCOM gear that has already been purchased and proven.
Just go a little deeper. What are the plans in terms of when it comes to Stryker? Are we talking? You said some Stryker. Are we talking full brigades, or what is the plan in terms of?
There's not enough of the light gear to go to every SBCT, and a Stryker brigade will be pure fleeted. Some of them will have all of the lighter gear. A few of them, and it's 1 or 2, I believe, but I'll have to get back to you on that. We'll have the older, heavier gear, just like the ABCTs do.
Okay, good. Yield back.
Thank you. Gentlemen, I'm going to have to apologize. Both my ranking member and I had conflicts for the end of this. I didn't want you to think that it was you. My ranking member had a memorial service for Member Slaughter, and I have a meeting with the chairman of the committee, so I'm going to pass the gavel over to Mr. Banks and call on Mr. Brown, but I appreciate your testimony and your service. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask the Army and probably General Ostrowski about the future of vertical lift and future vertical lift. I know that it is, I think, number 3 on the priority list, the 6 priorities for Army modernization, according to General Milley. Recently, General Tate described the development in a way that the Army is going to spend more time kind of working through issues, identifying requirements during the prototype phase, more so than in past fieldings or development, and so that this way, when you get to the program of record, we're able to deliver an aircraft that is much more adaptable to the changing environment, future requirements, upgrades in technology, et cetera. If I've mischaracterized, please correct me. But the question is, can you give us an update, and what is the plan for rapid prototype development? And are there ways to accelerate the ongoing analysis of the alternatives that you're currently considering?
Yes, sir. I would say that the tech demonstration, I believe is what you're talking about right now, is called the Joint Multi-Role. And again, this is the way that we should be doing acquisition in terms of being able to inform our requirements. And we're having industry buy-in. So industry's bought in both with respect to Boeing as well as and Sikorsky, and then Bell is a different partner. Each of these particular companies have come forward with their platforms to the tune of about $450 million worth of spent in terms of industry to the Army's $90 million per vendor in order to get at a demonstration of these technologies, whether it be tilt rotor or whether it be compound coaxial, which each of these vendors are providing. The intent is to have those fly. We've had the Bell flying already, and it continues to fly with respect to its prototype or its experimental version. And then now we're looking very forward to the summer as we get the Sikorsky Boeing compound coaxial up in the air. From there, sir, the intent is to finish off our analysis of alternatives by the second quarter of 19, which helps us further refine our requirements and determine what else is out there. And that allows us to then move into a TMRR, or tech maturity risk reduction phase of the program in 21. Depending on what we get and what we see from these two demonstrators allows us to make better decisions, better choices with respect to how far the technology really is. Are these experimental or are they more prototypes? We hope for the latter, but we're concerned that we might not get there in terms of that. So again, they might be just experimental as opposed to prototypes. In conjunction with that, we have to work with the Marines, and we want to work with the Marines in terms of getting our capability sets. We need their money as they need ours in order to pull this together. Again, that's going to be requirements trade-offs between the two services. So exciting program, the way we should be doing business.
With regard to your rotary wing fleet. Oh, I didn't have the mic on. Did you hear me?
Yes, I did. On the rotary wing side, I think the most challenging ones, we've actually been bringing in new programs with our Yankee Zulu on our H-1s. Obviously, we're still in the last of the multi-year for our MV-22s. Probably the big challenge that we've got, exciting challenge, is bringing in our CH-53 Kilo, which is the largest, most capability to lift the most of any helicopter that's made. So that right now is in the systems development stage, transitioning those helos up to Pax River for further testing. But I think that's probably the most, the leading thing that we've got going. Continue to buy out the last 25 AH-1 Zulus this year in 19. Continue with the MV-22 as the Navy takes on the carrier on-board delivery. We're shifting some of that procurement over to them. And then but really the CH-53 Kilo is our large aircraft, bringing that in and trying to make sure that that program moves forward.
Thank you. We like more work at Pax River in Maryland. Back to the Army. You may not be able to answer this in the time I have remaining. Futures Command. And I understand that there is currently no budget items specifically requested or allocated for Futures Command, which expects to be stood up by this summer, or at least the initial phase. Are you going to reprogram money from other accounts to fund this command?
We're going to try, sir. And so it's the same thing with the CFTs. When you look the cross-functional teams, when you look at the funding for the CFTs, and timing was very much against us on this. If you remember, it was last October that the Army announced number 1 Futures Command and number 2 the 8 cross-functional teams in support of the 6 Army modernization priorities. And it was December before the cross-functional teams charters were approved and what it was they were going to work on. So this was last December. We turned in our budget on the second week of January. So we got into the 19 budget what we possibly could, and we're really focused on the 20 budget for both Futures Command, which will go FOC in that budget, just an IOC capability in 19, and the cross-functional teams to get after it. And we were very much constrained by time with the 19 budget.
The gentleman's time has expired. I yield the next 5 minutes to myself. General Ostrowski and General Murray, I wonder if you can give us a quick status update on the Army's plan to replace the transmissions in the Bradley family of vehicles and armored multipurpose vehicle programs.
Yes, sir. The intent there with respect to, you're talking about the Bradley A4 variant. And again, as we made continual upgrades to the Bradley fleet of vehicles, the A3 being the last, which is the currently fielded capability, those were suspension upgrades. And so we're moving forward now. We've done the research and development, and we are now in the process of negotiating the production contract for the upgraded A4 version of the Bradley. The A4 Bradley has an upgraded transmission as well as engine, as well as additional electric power in order to run the systems that we continue to load onto the Bradley in terms of the overall electrical power piece. So we are in the process of finishing off those negotiations with BAE, and the intent there is to award that contract in the very near future.
Okay. Anything you'd like to add?
No, sir, but I think you said, I mean, there is some confusion about a replacement transmission. Right now, I mean, there's been no decisions on anything other than General Ostrowski just mentioned. The upgraded transmission we're working under the A4 contract.
Okay, my next question is for both of you as well. I noticed that in the fiscal year 2019 budget, there's a request for Humvee ambulance modernization funding for the second year in a row. However, there aren't any funds also requested for non-armored Humvee modernization. So I wonder if you can comment on both of those, and in your professional military opinion, if that's the best way forward.
So yes, sir, and thanks to Congress, we have been very successful at upgrading a very specific version of our Humvee, the up-armored ambulance, and thanks to the graciousness of Congress, the National Guard and the United States Army Reserve are complete with that modernization. We began a program last year. Congress added some money to it to do the active component, the regular Army ambulance fleet. We're about 10% through, and then we've asked for more money in 19. About 6 months ago, we had the decision meeting on the upgrading the Humvee fleet. In my mind, it's not a question of will we upgrade the Humvee fleet, it's just a question of when, because as you know, the JLTV fleet only replaces about 50% of our light tactical vehicle needs. So Humvees will be with us for a long time into the future. We talked about upgrading, starting with the unarmored Humvee fleet first, because that's the oldest fleet. That's about 9 years of fleet age. We like to keep it below about 12 years, so we're approaching that. That decision will go to the chief sometime within the next 2 to 3 months, and then we expect to quickly follow that on with what we want to do with the armored fleet Humvees. And again, in my opinion, it's going to be just a question of when, not necessarily if.
Sir, I would just add that we are poised from an industrial-based perspective with our public-private partnership with AM General, as well as Red River and Rock Island, in order to press forward should the decision be made to get after the recap of the Humvees.
Okay, thank you. My last question for all four of you, could you maybe address or talk for a moment about how you're addressing the systematic challenges of the redistribution of equipment, overcoming the growing capability gap between the active component and the reserve component? You talked a moment ago about the reserve component in my previous question, but as the reserve component units become more of a pit stop for divestiture, what are we doing to address those types of issues, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's really two pieces of that, sir, if I could. So equipment on hand is the amount of equipment. Actually, there's three. The equipment on hand is the equipment they have. We call that the EOH rating. We have made great strides during the course of the war to where the National Guard and the United States Army Reserve are almost at parity with the regular Army in terms of the equipment that they need on hand. The piece, as you're referring, and there's also the dual-use equipment. So in their state mission and their federal mission, we're in very good shape on that. Where the U.S. Army Reserve and the U.S. And the Army National Guard are lagging somewhat, although we have closed this gap over the last 10 years, is in the most modern equipment available. And that's primarily because we have focused our most modern equipment on the next deploying unit. So regardless of component, whether it was a reserve unit, a guard unit, or an active component unit, we put the equipment in the hands of that deploying unit, which often got left in theater for follow-on forces and became theater-provided equipment, which has set us back a bit. But we are very focused on closing that gap of modernized equipment in our three components.
I have 7 seconds left. Would anybody from the Marines like to comment on that?
Very quick, Congressman, I would say we look at it from a total force perspective. We deploy our reserve units all the time to fill for active units, so we try to maintain the same capabilities across both the active and reserve force.
Okay, my time has expired. I yield to Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here today. The budget request for fiscal year 2019 includes an Army request for $47 million to procure 133 ground mobility vehicles, which are fairly small, unarmored Jeep-like trucks, for a unit cost of $271,000 each, twice what a typical Humvee costs. Fiscal year 18 budget included a request for 100 vehicles of the same type for $260,000 each, $100,000 each. For these procurements, the Army has proposed doing a sole source contract award to procure a modified version of the Special Operations Command vehicle. The Army, based on an urgent need statement, plans to procure 5 brigade sets totaling about 300 vehicles via the sole source contract, with a plan for a competition in the future to buy more. General Murray, do you think a cost per vehicle for more than $100,000 each is warranted? I ask because there appear to be several commercially available vehicles on the market for much less, and the Army already has large numbers of unarmed Humvees that meet most of the requirements for this vehicle. Simply put, are we going to spend more than we should?
Sir, on the GMV, and if you don't mind, I'll start with the sole source contract. So in our opinion, that is not true. We bought off a existing SOCOM contract, so the SOCOM was buying this vehicle. They had headspace in their contract. This contract was competed prior to us buying off this contract. So we leveraged the SOCOM specifications. We leveraged the SOCOM open competition that this vehicle went through before we bought off the headspace on their contract. So in our opinion, it is not a sole source contract. We are buying off the SOCOM contract. The primary consideration for this vehicle when the decision was made to go with the SOCOM contract was speed. For, as you stated, 5 airborne IBCTs. The full and open competition, which has funding in 19 to complete, is for 30 IBCTs. Is the 270 high? It's higher than some of the options on the market, but this was the fastest way to get this requirement to the field because the competition was done, the EMD phase was done, the down select was done. So a lot of the things that takes up those years to get to what it is you're going to buy was done by SOCOM before we opted to buy off that contract.
Thank you very much. General Ostrowski, is there detailed records about the decision-making process that led to what was articulated by General Murray?
Yes, sir. We certainly documented that. I do have the SOCOM contract. I do have the modifications to the SOCOM contract that we can certainly make available to you, how it was competitively awarded, how we modified that contract in order to reduce the cost of the vehicle because we didn't need all of the components that SOCOM had on that vehicle, all the bells and whistles we didn't need because, again, what we needed was a capability to move in a period of darkness from a drop zone to a landing strip at the speed that is faster than the boot. And so hence the 5 airborne brigades to start with. The key thing here, sir, is that the competitive piece of this is going to be where industry is going to have the opportunity to really get after it. Right now, we're going to have vehicles in the field in 18, going off the SOCOM contract. Otherwise, we would not have had vehicles in the field until 20. The intent is, with the award of the competitive contract, as General Murray alluded to, the intent is to bring that forward and have the ability for the other 30 brigades to have a capability, again, competitively awarded, but we hope at a much cheaper price.
Thank you very much. I look forward to getting that from you in writing if possible. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman yields, and being in the chair has its privileges, so I'm going to yield another 5 minutes to myself. And back to you, General Murray and General Ostrowski. I wonder if you could talk, there's been some confusion about the objective of the Next Generation Combat Vehicle Program. And I wonder if you could talk about that for a moment, how the Army is balancing its investments in incremental upgrades for current vehicle systems versus next generation capabilities. So, General Murray?
So that's the fundamental dilemma, sir. I mean, you just hit it right on the head right there. And it's beyond next generation combat vehicle. And that's the inflection point that I talked about, or the decision point where the Army is. It's not so much stress in 19 because of the newness of the CFTs at that point, but in 20, as we build it, it is how you balance that investment between current, the incremental upgrades for the near term, and where you start investing heavily in future capability, because the period in between when you can start fielding new and when you stop upgrading old is risk, that you're really saying that the current fleet is good for X numbers of years, you know, whenever you can cut in that new system. Next generation combat vehicle, it's been described a variety of ways, and I go back to the original construct that I've heard briefed by General Lesbrance to both the chief and the secretary. It's really along 2 paths. And we really won't know where we're going until we do some of the experimentation, prototyping, the early evaluation by soldiers, which is one of the most important aspects of the CFTs, is get equipment into the hands of soldiers early and often throughout the process so we can get their deliberate feedback before we write a requirements document. There is no requirements document written for next generation combat vehicle, but the path we're on right now basically is 2 fundamental paths: a manned variant of some size, shape that would carry probably a couple crewmen and up to 5 or 6 soldiers in the back. That it has to be manned or unmanned. Commanders call at the point of decision whether you send a vehicle forward unmanned, for instance, into a breach. You probably want to send an unmanned vehicle, or you actually crew that vehicle. And then the second path is remote combat vehicles that could be teleoperated from the manned version. And so one manned vehicle teleoperated to robotic combat vehicles. And that's fundamentally the 2 paths that the NGCV cross-functional team is working down.
I would just add, sir, that there's really 3 sprints, as General Murray talked about, with respect to the 2 different variants. The first sprint is going to take place between now and the fourth quarter of 19. And the opportunity there is to gain knowledge from some of these experimental demonstrators that we have. Then conduct another sprint, add in additional technologies between now and 2021. So the second quarter of 21 will end the second sprint. Again, with soldiers, getting feedback, making use of existing technologies as well as future technologies, and then a final sprint, which gets us to the fourth quarter of 23. Again, incorporating lessons learned, incorporating technologies that come to bear and the rest of it, in order to get to a decision point in 23 of where we go from there.
And if I could just add real quick, so I mean, one of the key things of this is we won't get everything we want by whenever we feel this, and so building in the ability to add more capability as we go to upgrade the vehicle, like we've done with the tank and the Bradley. So the building in the size, the electrical capacity, the ability to add new technologies to it as we grow this vehicle.
Can you elaborate on the cost?
In NGCV, I've got it right here. So right now there's 165 million in 19 RDT&E.
What about through 2023?
I'm sorry, I pushed the wrong button. That's all pre-decisional, so that's what we're working on right now in the Palm build.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks to each of you. This has been very informative, just in the brief time that I've been here today as we near the NDAA period. So we appreciate your testimony and your participation. The hearing has adjourned.